Hey, I'm Tommy, and I'm out in the woods on a beautiful day to talk about the total solar eclipse that's happening in 1 week on April 8th, 2024. Now, there is a wealth of information out on YouTube right now, and it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much going on, but I felt like I would contribute to that steady stream of information by making smaller, shorter videos talking about the setups that I'm gonna do for the total solar eclipse. And this is all based off of like countless weeks of watching these videos obsessively and getting whatever information I could to make up my own plan. We'll talk about the gear that I'm using and the settings that I'm using, and maybe we'll touch on in the small action camera video set the different apps and stuff that I'm using for like just a little bit of extra info. But anyway, hope you enjoy, and let's get right into it. Okay, so the first thing is the telephoto setup. Now, the telephoto setup is probably the results that most people are going for. They're just trying to get that one image of the eclipse nice and big in the frame, looking very nice and fancy and everything else. This is probably the most complex of the setups too, in regards of how much you have to manipulate your camera to do this properly. And the end result goal with every one of these kind of shoots for the eclipse and every one of these gear setups that I have going on here is that you have much less time fiddling with your camera and more time to actually physically look at the eclipse with your own eyes. You know, you're going to remember seeing the eclipse a lot more than you're going to remember photographing the eclipse. And that's kind of the goal here, is to touch your camera as little as possible and have it as automated as possible, but still be able to get the photos. So in the telephoto regard, we actually do have to mess with the camera a little bit here and there, especially during the events are actually happening. But ultimately, if you're just doing this setup, it'll be a breeze and everything will be fine. You'll get the results you want. So first, here's a quick rundown of the telephoto setup. I have, starting from the bottom and working my way up, we have the Manfrotto tripod, and that tripod is a nice, sturdy, stable tripod. That's all you really need, is something that's rigid and doesn't shake around a lot when you put it on the ground. And even for extra security, we're gonna have the tripod put pretty low to the ground as well, only like extend a couple legs out of it so that it's only a few feet off the ground. This will help with stability and keeping everything as rigid as possible. From there, there's a stone bag that I've actually attached to this, and these are like 10 bucks on Amazon. It's really cheap. But what they do is when you strap them to the legs of the tripod, you can then put weight inside this bag and it'll weigh down the tripod to keep it stable. This also works with like if you took your camera bag and put it on a hook in the center column of your tripod. But for my particular tripod, I don't have one of those hooks. From there, we have the Benro 3-way geared head, because if you use a ball head, you have to loosen the ball head lock, and then that'll cause the camera to kind of flop around, and you'll lose the sun very easily, and you'll have to reframe the sun and take a lot longer to reframe it. Whereas with the 3-way geared head, you simply just frame it the one time, well in advance, and then as the sun moves through your frame, you could just turn these little knobs here and adjust the sun back into the position that you want. From there, we have the Canon R5 attached with a battery grip, just so I could have more battery power, and then a RF 100-500 lens. The reason why I don't have any telephoto extenders on here is I've heard lots of reviews online that were saying you don't want to go higher than 600 millimeters in focal length, and you don't want to go lower than like 300 millimeters in focal length. So 300 to 600 is the range you want to hit for the sun. And the reason why is 600 millimeters, as soon as you go beyond that, you risk cutting the corona lines that are coming off the eclipse. They'll go running off the frame. So if you want the entire eclipse with all its beautiful corona beams coming off of it, you want to have 600 millimeters or less. So if I put an extender on this, that 500 could be 700 real quick. So I'm just not bothering with an extender. Especially because this year we have a solar maximum, and I'll throw up the predicted path right now from this one university company that does a lot of these solar predictions. The beams are going to be like two really big prominent ones just shooting out to the sides, and those will definitely get cut off if you have a deeper than 600 millimeter focal length. So I've got my Canon RF 100 to 500 right here, just ready to go. And then plugged into the camera on the R5 front port there is the Velo Shutter Boss. It's just a really old intervalometer time-lapse remote that I had for forever. And I'm not using it for the time-lapse feature. I'm just using it for this big old button right here. Whereas if I can just manually hit this button, I don't have to touch my camera at all. It could stay as rigid and flat as possible, and I could just hit this button and take the photo. And then of course, all of this has the solar filter over the top, which is my Helios glass thread-on solar filter. And I bought this filter originally because everybody said glass was sharper than film. I've gotten mixed reviews back and forth where like sometimes film is sharper, sometimes glass is sharper. So it's really, I think it just depends on the manufacturing and its ability. So I went with this filter, but of course the thread-on factor takes a lot of time to thread it on and off your camera. So what I did instead was I built a little solar housing for it out of an older film full solar housing that I had that I accidentally broke the film on. And instead of just replacing it with a new piece of film, I instead bought a step-down ring that goes from, I believe, 92 millimeters to 77 millimeters, and just completely sealed it onto this solar housing. So now I could just put on this glass filter like a slip-on cover. So that's what I have going for my full gear setup. Going back down to that three-way geared head, what I am aiming to do is, since the sun at 500 millimeters, the sun will travel through that frame, and in between 10 and 13 minutes, it'll go from one side of my camera frame to the other side of my camera frame. So with this being said, it's a lot easier to just use the geared head, adjust the knobs to the leftmost side of the image, and then every 8 to 10 minutes, which I think I'm doing 10 minutes, but every 10 minutes, I'm just going to adjust the sun back over to the left and just let it keep going through the frame and adjust back over to the left. For the entire partial series of the Eclipse that runs from like, I believe in Texas, it's like 12:15 to like 3 or something like that, somewhere around 3 o'clock, with the actual eclipse itself happening around 1:33. I'm going to be adjusting every 10 minutes. So at 1:30 to 1:40, that's going to be where the actual total solar eclipse happens. My camera is already going to be adjusted, so the entire duration of the eclipse will be traveling through one of my framed setups. From the partial phases, I'm going to utilize an app called the Solar Eclipse Timer app. And what you do is, this particular app, you pay like, I think the app itself is free, but then you got to pay $1.99 for all the current year's eclipse information. And then wherever you are in the world for this particular path of the eclipse, you just simply log your GPS coordinates with your phone into the app, and then the app will give you a whole bunch of contact times of like, when's the most prominent part of this partial phase, when's the most prominent part of C1, C2, C3, C4. And what's cool about that is you can use the contact times list that it generates to plan out your shots when it comes to partial eclipse. So what I aim to do is go to the location, get my GPS login for that app, right? Get those GPS coordinates, and then have this contact time list figure out. And once it gives me those times, just set a timer for each one of those times and just manually take those pictures based on each one, so that I wind up with the 20 images or so that they recommended of the partial phase. Now, of course, if there's any camera shake to worry about or anything like that, I'll take 5 shots in a row, 10 shots in a row, whatever, at each time to get the partial phase done. That's all I'm gonna have to do. For that, you're gonna want to have that all programmed into custom mode 1. I'm not sure what other camera brands have it called, but it's where you can save your settings and then quickly reference those settings. And for Canon, they call it the custom mode. So there's 3 custom modes on my camera, so I'll be utilizing all 3 of them. Custom mode 1 will be these partial phase image stuff, which we'll get a little bit deeper into the settings here after I describe this stuff. After the partial phase, when right before C2, which is C2 is when the eclipse starts. So right before C2, there's announcements saying like, put your hands on your camera filter, take off your camera filter that this app describes. That'll be when I switch over to C2, which will be for the diamond ring and Bailey's beads, and get all those image sequences from that. And then when totality hits, then I switch over to custom mode 3. So custom mode 1 is partial image phase stuff, custom mode 2 is diamond ring Bailey's bead stuff, and custom mode 3 is the settings that I'll have for totality. And then of course, when I'm switching between these, it's all based on what this solar app timer application is announcing as it goes through the times, because I'm going to be so busy trying to keep everything in order, but still also look up at the eclipse myself. And I want to be able to not have to be fully aware of exactly what time is happening at what time, just having all these phone alerts and stopwatches and stuff like that to tell me when the best time to take the shot. So yeah, custom mode 1, taking pictures of the partial eclipse. Then when diamond ring Bailey's beads come in as it's moving into totality, that's when custom mode 2 is being used. And then custom mode 3 is totality itself. All right, so now we're going to talk about the settings, because settings is kind of a touchy subject. A lot of people are like, oh, use these settings for sure. Some people are like, I can't tell you what settings to use. There's no way I could tell you that. I learned the reason why people can't tell you what settings is because your solar filter that you bought is completely different than somebody else's solar filter. For example, a film solar filter from Thousand Oaks, they have a solar light polymer filter, and it comes out a little darker. So you're gonna need a little slower of a shutter speed for your settings. The glass one that I have is pretty bright, so you're gonna want a little faster of a shutter speed for your settings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So based on your solar filter is how you're gonna determine the first set of settings, which is, my version is custom mode 1, which is the partial phase settings. The partial phase settings are the same thing as the full solar disk image settings, okay? And what the full solar disk image settings are is you take the solar filter that you have, you put it over the front of your camera, you point your camera at the sun on a nice sunny day at home, wherever you are, preferably around the same time as when the eclipse is happening, just so you can get an idea of where you're pointing in the sky. Also, there's not a lot of atmospheric haze like there would be towards the horizon line. So the higher up, the better of where the sun is. And then you just move around and take several pictures based on exposures. So a good example is go ahead and switch it to either f8, f9, f10, or f11, and then pick an ISO value. ISO 200, ISO 400, you can go as low as ISO 100 if you really wanted to. And then those are your two kind of more concrete ones that you're gonna like pick and just stick with those. And then it's your shutter speed makes the big determination here. So To get the full solar disk image setting, you're going to want to just start moving your shutter speed around and start very low. Start at like 1/200th of a second, 1/100th of a second, and just go all the way up to like 1/4000th of a second or 1/8000th of a second if your camera can handle that. Just go ahead and take that whole range of exposures, keeping your aperture the same, whatever one you decided to do, and keeping your ISO the same, whatever you decided to do, and just change your shutter all the way up on this bright sunny day at home. Then put all this stuff into the computer and look on the computer the images. Don't look at the back of the screen, because the back of the screen on your camera might mislead you a little in terms of brightness based on whatever your JPEG settings are that previews on the back of the camera. On your computer, you'll see the raw image and you'll see the image that you want to decide from. Whatever looks the most pleasing to you, that is your full solar disk image setting. So let me give you an example. For me, with my Helios Glass Seymour solar filter, the most perfect setting was 1/1250 at f10 with ISO 400. I had chosen f10 and ISO 400, and 1/1250 was like the dialed in setting. But I don't really like that. I like a little bit of brightness on the inside of the sun, just because it showed the limb darkening a little bit more. The limb is the outer edge of the circle. On a sphere, they call it a limb because it's the perceived edge. But anyway, the outer edge of the circle is like supposed to have a gradual darkening to really give that spherical effect of the sun. And so the brighter the image on the middle without blowing out the sunspots is what I prefer when I'm looking at this image. So I actually went a little bit slower on my shutter speed. So my shutter speed full solar disk image is 1/1000th, f10, ISO 400. I felt like that was the ideal that I'm going to stick with, and that could potentially change later when I'm actually out on location and I'm pointing at the sun just for like an example test before the eclipse ever starts. This could be that setting, you know? Now, custom mode 2 is just for the diamond ring and Bailey's beads, which happen within like 20 seconds, right? They go really, really quick right by. This is right after you take off the solar filter, you're gonna start firing the camera to try to capture this diamond ring and Bailey's beads. The formula that a lot of people say online, there's a mixture of things for it, okay, is go anywhere from 1 to 2.5 stops darker on your shutter speed. Now, stop is doubling your shutter speed, okay? So keep in mind your aperture and ISO are staying the same. So in my case, it was f10 ISO 400. And we're shooting at 1000 because that's what I prefer on the partial image phase stuff based on my full solar disk image setting, okay? So for me, one stop would make it 1/2000th of a second for a shutter speed. 2 stops would make it 1/4000th of a second. And I kind of felt like 1/4000th of a second was just a little too dark, and I might miss out on the brilliance of the diamond ring that happens right before Bailey's beads going into the eclipse. So I decided I'm only going to do 1 stop of a different setting to be on the safe side. So in my case, it's going to be 1/2000th of a second at f10 with ISO 400. So basically you just kind of have to guess in this particular bit. But your whole point of the reason why this is its own custom setting mode, in my case, it's custom mode number 2. The reason why I have to switch over to that before I go to take these shots is I'm going to shoot in a high speed mode, just like a continuous shutter, and just hold the button down and let this thing rapid fire take some shots. I guess technically you don't need like high speed. You can do low speed continuous if your camera supports that. Whereas when I was in partial phase, I was just in a single shot taking a photo and that's it, no big deal. Just taking a photo, hitting the button. Every time I took a photo, it took 1 shot. With custom mode 2, I'm in a high-speed drive mode. I'm holding the button down 20 to 30 seconds before. As soon as that solar filter comes off, that button gets pressed, and I'm holding down that button the entire time until totality starts. This is what the aim is, to be able to capture the brilliance of the diamond ring. Starting 30 seconds early or 20 seconds early should give me a little bit of like a shine over the top of the moon right when the moon's about to finish covering the sun. And then I'll also be 1 stop darker at 1/2000th of a second, which is double my full solar disk image. So that'll be enough to be dark enough to try to get some Bailey's beads out of the shot. All right, and we're finally at C3, which is totality. Totality is the big deal. This is the one that's the most important, but also this is the most complex one. And this one, you actually have to fiddle with your camera quite a lot while you're doing this. C2 to C3, which is the contact time 2 to contact time 3 of totality, is, you know, whatever the length of window is that you're going to be at. I believe the maximum is like 4.5 minutes of totality this year. So during that time frame, you have plenty of time to take at least 1 to 2 bracketed ranges of exposures. So you're still going to keep your aperture the same, in my case f10. You're still going to keep your ISO the same, in my case ISO 400. But now your shutter speed has to be bracketed. And there's 2 methods to do this. You could either manually move the shutter all the way down to like a 1/2 second or 1 second, take a photo, then move it up 2 clicks. So that's 2/3 of a stop up normally on most people's camera. And then take a shot and keep going faster and faster in your shutter speed until you get all the way to like 1/4000th of a second, and then stop and then go back the other direction. You could probably do that at least 1 time, if not twice, but you're gonna be looking down at your camera probably quite a bit moving that shutter wheel. So what I'm doing for my own personal method is the Canon R5 allows you to take a 7-shot auto bracket, and it'll take all 7 photos all at the same time if you put it on a 2-second timer drive mode. So the first thing you do, which all of this will be saved in custom mode 3 on my camera. And what the first thing it does is you set the auto exposure to about 2 to 3 stop difference. And then I think I'm going with a 3 stop difference on the setting. And then having my drive mode taken to the 2-second timer mode. And then it's gonna be at 1/500th of a second. Why? Because I found like that was a very good middle point on the 7 shots auto bracket range. So at 500th of a second, it's gonna go up 3 stops, and it's gonna go down 3 stops in the full bracket range, as well as take that 1/500th of a second photo. From there, I'm gonna move the shutter myself to 320 and take another shot doing the same thing. And then I'm gonna go all the way down to 1/13th of a second and take another shot and get that bracketed range. With this 2-second timer on and your auto bracket set to 3 stop difference, taking 7 shots, every time you hit that button, 2 seconds will go by, and then it'll take 7 photos all at one time in that varying range. Then I'm moving the bracket by moving the shutter speed, those 3 numbers, 1/500th, 1/320th, 1/13th. And that'll be a bracketed set all the way up high, a bracketed shot to cover everything in the middle, and then a bracketed shot at the lower end that goes down to, I believe, that's like a 1/2 second on brightness. And the reason why is the Corona has varying degrees of brightness. The faster shutter speed will get the middle, like the inner ring of the Corona, and the slower you go, the more you get the distance of beams that go out. And then what's cool is when you bracket like this, you could, if you're equipped enough to do this in Photoshop, you could combine all of these as an HDR image and get the entire spectrum of Corona beams all around the Eclipse, which is pretty cool. Or you could just pick the best one out of all of these if you want to as well. So I have custom mode set up to have this 7-shot auto bracket ready to go that take all 7 shots on a 2-second timer. And when totality hits, there's 2 times I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go from 1/500th, that'll be the first shot I do. As soon as totality starts, take that set of 7 images, then drop the shutter down to 320, take that set of 7 images, and then drop the shutter down to 1/13th and take that set of images to be able to get the full range. Then I'm gonna wait till I hear the Solar Eclipse timer app say, max eclipse in 10 seconds, which is like the midpoint of the eclipse. 2 minutes have gone by at this point, and I'm gonna do it again. We're gonna go back up the direction. 1/13th, 7 shots. 1/320th, 7 shots. 1/500th, 7-shot auto bracket. The reason why is I should get 2 ranges of exposures, one going down and one going up. That should be perfect and more than enough photos for the eclipse. But I get one at the beginning just so that I have something in case something happens or goes wrong. I'll at least have something. And get one at max eclipse, because that's when the moon is perfectly centered over the sun, and that's when you're gonna get the best results of the eclipse. Once you're done with those 2 sets of brackets and that midpoint has passed, switch back to C2, which is custom mode 2. Switch back to that so that when the announcer says contact 3 is in 20 seconds, you'll be able to be ready for diamond ring and Bailey's beads all over again. So if you notice, I said I'm only doing 2 bracket sets of the totality. In 4 minutes, that's maybe a minute of the time. So now I've got 3 minutes to just enjoy the eclipse for myself. Look up at it, enjoy it. Heck, while I'm taking those shots and I'm moving that shutter speed, I just have to look down really quick, move the shutter speed, and look back up, and I could take those shots again. Then look back down, do that, take the shot. Do that over and over again, you'll be able to get everything you want. All right, we're almost done. So now, they call it contact 3 or C3. That's when the total solar eclipse is going in reverse order now, everything that you're gonna be firing. So you switched over to custom mode 2 on your camera, which is the diamond ring Bailey's bead stuff. And right, like within 10 seconds before C3, contact 3 happens, you start firing off your shots, getting the diamond ring and Bailey's beads on the way out of the image. And then you could switch back to C1 and take your partial image, your partial eclipse images, which is, again, those settings are gonna be identical to your full solar disk image settings that you started out with. So that's the whole thing with the telephoto setup. It sounds like a lot, and I bet you this was probably even longer winded than I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a lot shorter of a video, but there's a lot of information here. But yeah, the bottom line of this is by automating this as much as possible. So everything is in your custom mode settings, so you don't have to manually switch all your settings yourself. You could focusing on the sun every so often and adjusting those gear knobs to make sure the sun stays in the frame. And then you're firing C1 or custom mode 1 throughout the partial phase. Then when diamond ring comes, right before diamond ring comes, you get about a minute heads up by seeing a very thin crescent. Or the contact time sheet on the app will be like your last image. Once that last image happens, you switch over to custom mode 2 and you fire off bursts the minute you take off your solar filter for the diamond ring stuff. And then when totality starts in, you switch to custom mode 3, and then that's the most work you have to do. You take a shot, get 7 shots, switch the shutter speed, take a shot, get 7 shots, etc., to get enough satisfactory brackets that you want. When that's all said and done, then you're able to finally switch back to C2 to get the diamond ring Bailey's beads again. And then when it's all said and done, the very exit partial phase stuff to finish off the day, you switch to C1 and get those images. So I hope this was helpful. This is a long-winded one, I think, even though I tried to make it as short as possible. But the end result is Custom modes are very important. Having the custom modes in your saved settings already ready to go way in advance. So you just have to switch to those custom modes to really be able to get the shot exposures that you're looking for. Having a remote trigger to hit the button instead of hitting the shutter button on your camera will allow the camera to stay as rigid as possible to get the sharpest photos possible. And then to get your solar disk image settings dialed in, you put your solar filter that you have, you point it at the sun, you pick an aperture and an ISO value that you're happy with, somewhere between f8 and f11, and then you fire off all different shutter speeds. You take a photo, and then you look on the computer, and which one of those that you like the most, that's your settings that you're gonna use for this whole formula. And then you plug those settings in. Formula, the full settings are gonna be for custom mode 1, then 1 to 2 stop difference in your shutter speed is gonna be your custom mode 2. Then your bracketing of exposures is your custom mode 3, keeping the ISO and aperture the same. So I hope all this was useful. If not, please ask me down in the comments below any questions. I'll help you out as much as I can in the coming up days, because I know we only got a week out. And if you've got any other advice you want to kind of contribute to this, by all means drop a comment as well. Otherwise, have a great time. My name's Tommy, and hope for clear skies on Monday. See you later. A turtle came to see me. I don't know if you can see him. Gopher tortoise. Here we go, get nice and close to him. Hey buddy. Trying to watch my Eclipse video? Yeah, I didn't think it was that good of a video either.